A critical mass. Good afternoon again to everyone and a warm welcome to today's webinar. And thank you for taking your time to join us today. We hope you're in good condition and we hope that you grab the coffee or a takeaway lunch, which you can have with you for the next interesting 1 hour and 15 minutes for today's webinar. My name is Raimund Meyer. I'm Senior Water Resource Management Specialist working for the World Bank in the Vienna office, and I'm also the team leader of the Danube Water Program, which is a regional technical assistance program, and in the frame of which we are organizing today's webinar. So it's my pleasure to moderate today's webinar with the title Revised Regulation, Renewed Challenges, the EU Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. And the webinar is organized in the so-called Danube Water Program KnowNow series, where we try to focus on up-to-date topics relevant for the water sector in the Danube region. It's not the first webinar on the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, which we're organizing already 2 years ago, actually, in March 2021. We organized a webinar on the review of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive from 1991. So the directive, the existing directive, is more than 30 years old in the meantime already. And since its adoption in 1991, the quality of European rivers, lakes, and seas has significantly improved due to the implementation of the directive, which triggered major investments. And I'm talking here about billions of euros in Europe. So the status of waters has significantly improved. In many countries, particularly in the EU countries, collection systems have been constructed, wastewater treatment plants have been constructed, often with help of EU co-funding. Yet time has moved on and there's still pollution that needs to be addressed and is not covered by the current rules. Furthermore, also other issues gained importance in line with the EU Green Deal, including, for instance, specifically issues around energy efficiency, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, circular economy, or access to the most vulnerable and marginalized groups, so access to services of those groups. And as a consequence, and in line with the results of the evaluation and on the basis of an extensive impact assessment, the European Commission has recently published on the 26th of October 2022 a proposal for a revised Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, which will be subject of today's webinar. But before we start to introduce to you the panelists and speakers, just some brief housekeeping rules and some logistics. We want to make you aware that this session will be recorded and made available on demand on the Voice of the Danube website. So following the webinar, the recording, the presentation slides, and also the session summary will be published on the website, and you see here the link also on the slide. Furthermore, this session is intended to be very interactive with you. So please use the chat box, use it for general questions and interactions with other participants. And there's also a specific Q&A box, which you can use to send specific questions to the panelists. Please also note that attendees' microphones are muted, so we cannot respond to any raised hands in the frame of the Zoom tool, but you can interact with us via chat and Q&A as mentioned. Coming now to introducing to you our today's panelists, and we are very happy to have with us a very dedicated group of experts from the EU and from the Danube region. Briefly introducing to you first Mr. Michel Sponat, who is the Deputy Head of Unit in DG Environment, dealing with the marine environment and clean water services. Michel is since December 2015 the Deputy Head of Unit, co-leading the unit, and his unit is dealing with important directives like the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, but also other directives like the Drinking Water Directive and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. Michel will give a presentation on the proposal from the new directive, and afterwards we will have reactions from 3 panelists. We have with us like a group of people from EU and non-EU countries. First, starting with Ms. Sanja Barbalic, who is the head of the Water Management Institute in Croatian waters. Sanja has significant experience with the implementation of EU directives in Croatia, and also including investment programs, in particular for the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, but also the Drinking Water Directive. And Sanja will provide her reaction also from the side of a EU member state and more from a policy perspective also she's dealing with. Then who we also have with us is Ms. Enkeleda Ginaldi, actually Professor Enkeleda Ginaldi, who is active at the Polytechnic University of Tirana in Albania. She's a researcher at the university, but at the same time also active as a consultant, also for different donor and development organizations, including also for the World Bank. And Enkeleda will provide her perspective and her input from the perspective of a non-EU country, and also from the perspective of a researcher and as a consultant. And then third, in terms of the reactions in the panel, we have with us Mr. Csaba Bauer, who is the water treatment management manager of the company Aquaserve in Romania. Csaba has more than 30 years of experience in the water supply and wastewater treatment sector. However, he told us that his specific passion is on wastewater treatment. So he is the ideal candidate subject for providing his input also today. And Aquaserve is a regional water utility operator providing water services in the Mureș County of Romania, which runs several water utilities and serving around 500,000 people in the region. And he will provide his point of view from a utility operator from an EU member state. So this was a brief introduction. I think with this intro, I would like to hand over to Michelle. We will first have like a 15 to 20 minute presentations, afterwards brief reactions from our panelists. And please again, use the chat box, use the Q&A tool in order to interact with us, because we will direct the questions then also to Michelle and to the other panelists to have a lively discussion. So with this brief introduction, I would like to give the floor to Michel Sponard in order to provide his presentation on the revision of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. So Michel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I hope you had a good digestion to speak about wastewater now, so we are fully ready and prepared to discuss about this fascinating file. I'm Michel Sponard. I'm working in the European Commission. I'm in charge of several directives, but now I'm mainly focusing on the review of this Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. I think on the next slide, you will see that before starting a review of this directive, we made an in-depth analysis of the existing directive, what has worked and not worked. And in fact, we have some lessons from this evaluation. All in all, I think that collectively at European level, we can certainly be collectively, proud of this directive. I mean, member states, citizen, European Union, I mean, all level of, from the citizen to the European level have been involved in the implementation of this directive, and the results were tangible. I mean, we managed to really improve our infrastructure in the European Union. We managed to collect the wastewater. We managed to treat it. The level of implementation of this directive is quite high now. I'm conscious that some member states still need to raise their level to ensure the full implementation of this directive, but overall we are above 95% of implementation at European level, which is a good performance amongst the environmental directives. Some lessons that we have learned is that the success of this directive is mainly due because it's a simple directive. We know exactly what we need to do. The member states know, the local authorities as well. So the deadlines are clear, the objectives are clear. The tool is in fact very simple. Also, we have applied a kind of a carrot and stick approach. So on one side, it's clear that the European Union is the guardian of the treaty. And so we have launched several, and we are still launching infringement procedure for those member states not respecting the deadline and the objective of this directive. But at the same time, the European funds were made available to several countries, and it was a huge effort from the European side as well, because we are investing on average 2 billion per year in water infrastructure in the member states, and all that is coming with the additional effort from our colleagues from the World Bank or from the European Investment Bank. But still, we think that there are some room for improvements with this directive. Probably the first is that we have still pollution coming from the urban source. I will illustrate that. Eutrophication remains an issue in several places in the European Union, not only in close seas like the Baltic Sea or the Black Sea, but also in some areas and some rivers where indeed there is a less exchange and where there is an accumulation of nitrogen and phosphorus. We also think that the sector was not really thinking about its energy use and the greenhouse gas emission from the sector. And so there we need to do something to simply put it in the future. And then also, clearly, this sector is a captive market, and maybe we can already go to the next slide. Meaning our citizen ourselves, when we for water supply and for sanitation, we don't have the choice of the operator because it's a public competence mainly, even if some of these competence are simply delegated to private company, but there is always a public competent authority above which is managing these contracts. And so you have a lot of you have a lot of public operators which are doing a great job. You have also mixed companies and private companies operating like that. But the fact is that it's a quasi-monopoly sector where people have no choice. So the competition is relatively limited, which triggers some additional requirements. Another characteristic is that most of the big facilities are concentrated. The polluting load is concentrated in a relatively number of facilities in the European Union. So above 100,000 inhabitants, you can see that around 46% of the load is going there. So meaning that with targeting a relatively reduced number of facilities, we can have a big influence on the polluting charge and the polluting load going back to the rivers and the seas. Another last characteristic is that this sector, due to its public nature, is mainly funded by two main sources. The first is water tariff. And there, according to the figures that we have from OECD, around 70% of the costs are covered by water tariff, directly paid by the citizen and by those using water. And then the remaining 30% is covered by public budget. You have a large variety amongst member states. Some member states are nearly at 100% of water tariff coverage, to others, but there are less and less. There is only one member state, in fact, remaining, having nearly no water tariff. All the other member states have a mixed strategy. On the next slide, you will see an illustration of the remaining pollution. So we have made all this effort. We have invested in this infrastructure, and our citizens are paying for that, and the public budget are, also paying for that. But we still have some difficulties with some remaining pollution. The first source is simply non-compliant agglomeration. So we still have a few countries, as I was mentioning, which are not fully compliant with the directive. And clearly, we need to finalize this infrastructure so that everybody in the European Union would be compliant with the existing directive. Then the second source, big source that we have identified is the rainwater. In fact, the rain regime is changing due to climate change, and it's quite concrete in our cities. We can see it, and meaning that we have sudden rain now taking a lot of pollution back to the wastewater treatment plants, and the directive allows the bypass of these wastewater treatment plants in case of heavy rain. But the pollution driven by the rainwater at the beginning is not well managed in several instances, meaning that it's an important source of remaining pollution for the future. In a sense, it's a little bit regrettable that we have made all these efforts in the infrastructure for the dry weather, and then suddenly with one or two heavy rain, you have a massive amount of pollution going back to the river simply because it's allowed to bypass the wastewater treatment plant. Another source is the small facilities, the decentralized facilities, which are allowed under this directive, but we have seen that the control of this low installation or small installation, so-called individual appropriate system, is really deficient depending on the member states. In some member states, the control is really well organized, but in others not. And we think that it's an important remaining source of pollution. Another one is nitrogen and phosphorus coming from the existing facilities. But simply there, the standards are 30 years old. And we just realized that with the new techniques, we can certainly optimize these facilities so that nitrogen and phosphorus can be better tackled. And last but not least, micropollutants are pollutant of emerging concerns. And we have seen in the recent years a dramatic increase of the accumulation of this micropollutant in the environment. And clearly, the wastewater treatment plants are an important source point of micropollutant. On the next slide, it's a summary of how we have propose this new revision of the directive. In fact, we made a lot of consultation, and we start with the member states, and we made a seminar and different interactive events so that we are really sure that we are using the best practice in place already in the member states. There is nothing that we propose which is not in place, at least in one or two member states in the European Union. So all that for us is feasible and already achieved, partly in some countries. It's clear that there are differences between the member states. Probably one of the challenges of this proposal is to bring everybody at the same level of ambition based on the best practice already in application in the member states. For the rest, we made a classical cost and benefit analysis of different options to solve all the problems that I have mentioned. And then, depending on the result of the cost-benefit analysis, we have chosen our preferred option, knowing that we attach a lot of importance to administrative burden on one side, so to reduce administrative burden as much as possible. And then on the other side, to make sure that there is a high contribution to the objective of the Green Deal, so that we give a vision to this sector for the next 20 years. Investments are taking time in this sector, and we need to give this vision, which is secure for the next 20 years. On the next slide, you will see the main novelties of this proposal. But the first is rainwater. There we were quite prudent. We have a kind of a general objective at European level, but in fact we leave a lot of flexibility to the member states and mainly their local authority, so that they can find out what is the best solution, the optimal solution at local level. It's clear that this solution must be defined and designed at local level. But what we propose is a kind of strategy of approach that would lead to this optimization. So at European level, we are just imposing to make an integrated approach of the water quantity and quality management in the cities, so that the rainwater which is polluted is tackled, identified, tackled, and not released in the environment. That is a little bit the general philosophy for rainwater. This philosophy is also based on the fact that we would like to push the local authority to use preventive measures, so to try to have more green in the cities, because that is a way of avoiding that the clean water is going into the pipes, and then to have an optimization of the existing infrastructure, and when need be, to build additional reservoir or retention infrastructure, but as much as possible based on green infrastructure. We have then expanded the scope of the directive to smaller cities. For the time being, the directive starts at 2,000 inhabitants. We propose to go to 1,000 inhabitants. Doesn't mean that this village between 1,000 and 2,000 should have a collective system. They can still have an individual system, but it means that we will expand the scope and push the member states to invest in collective systems where it makes sense. Only where it makes sense. Then on nutrients, we are proposing a reinforcement of the nitrogen and phosphorus objectives. So limit values, but also target, overall target of reduction. We think that what we propose is reasonable in the sense that according to the information we have, this could be done with an optimization of the existing facilities. It should not lead to the rebuilding of existing infrastructure apart from exceptional case. We also think that for nitrogen and phosphorus, it makes sense to have a systematic treatment of nitrogen and phosphorus when the wastewater treatment plant is big, so above 100,000 inhabitants. We think that this nitrogen and phosphorus treatment should be imposed whatever the receiving waters are, because we think that the risk for the environment is too high. For micropollutant, it's a little bit the same approach. We suggest to have new standards for micropollutant. This standard would be imposed on big facilities above 100,000 inhabitants. And like for nitrogen and phosphorus above 10,000 inhabitants, for the cities above 10,000 inhabitants, we propose to apply a risk-based approach, meaning that the investment, both for tertiary treatment and for this treatment of micropollutant, it will only be imposed where there is a risk for the environment or public health. And we have included in the directive several criteria to make sure that the risk-based approach is applied in a fair way, in a harmonized way in the European Union. On the next slide, you can see that we are also working on energy, climate, and circular economy. Concretely, we suggest to move towards an objective of energy neutrality for the sector. In other terms, the energy which is used by the sector should be compensated by the energy produced by the sector. And when I say energy produced, I mean renewable energy produced. How to do that? I mean, we have already 2-3 countries going in that direction, and by 2025, so we propose here by 2040. But the first thing is really making an effort on energy efficiency, and that's why we are suggesting to have systematic energy audits, regular energy audits in all facilities above 10,000 inhabitants. And then to make, after the first efforts on energy efficiency, because the potential is enormous, that according to our figures, if you compare the energy used in different facilities in the European Union, you can really see with the same objective size, you know, and same level of treatment, enormous variation. So we think that there is a lot to be done first there, but then after there are you know, on renewables, you know, in fact, wastewater treatment plant was identified in our strategy, you know, at European level as potential source of production of renewable, not only solar and wind, but also biogas coming from the sludge. We are also proposing a strategy to reduce pollution at source, where it's possible, so that sludge and water can be reused afterward when after the treatment. On the next slide, you can see what we propose in terms of governance. I don't want to insist too much, but we are proposing different things to increase the transparency of the sector, which is important because it's a kind of driver for more performance in the sector. So transparency is quite important. We are also proposing 2 additional things to improve access to sanitation for all, and then also to ensure that some key health parameters are systematically measured in the wastewater treatment plan. This is more valid for our colleagues of public health, but for instance, during the COVID crisis, it was absolutely clear that this type of information would have been extremely useful. We can identify COVID and other viruses in the wastewater, and often in advance of the pandemics. The next slide is quite new and original. We are suggesting to cover the additional cost for the treatment of micropollutant to simply have a system of producer responsibility. In fact, the principles are very simple and already applied in solid waste. Well, it's mainly the cosmetic and the pharmaceutical industry which are placing on the market their products. Then these products are creating residues in the wastewater, micropollutant. And then this micropollutant needs to be treated in the fourth treatment, and it has a cost. And in fact, all the strategy in this directive is simply to make sure that this cost is taken on board by the industries, by the pharmaceutical and the cosmetic industries, because they are responsible of the pollution created through their product in the wastewater. This is new in the wastewater domain, but I can tell you that in the solid waste domain, it is largely used for different waste streams. So that's why we are proposing it here. On the next slide, it's a little summary of how it would work, this system of producer responsibility, but it's a very classical approach where we are fixing the main rules at European level, but then the member states have flexibility to adapt these main rules to their way of working. But at the end, the most important is that the producer and the importer placing product on the market are contributing financially to a kind of private fund, which is driven by a producer responsibility organization under the control of the authorities and of auditor. And so that the money which is collected according to the quantity placed on the market by each of their members is going back to the wastewater treatment operator so that they can invest in additional treatment. The last slides are related to the impact of our proposal. The first is, you can see here a summary of the pollution reduction that we are expecting for each pollutant. We are in between the baseline and a kind of a maximum feasible option. We will also reduce microplastics. Microplastics are already well captured by the wastewater treatment plants, but we'll further capture them, notably by the effort made on rainwater. And then with the effort that we are making on energy neutrality, but also better nitrogen management, the expected reduction of greenhouse gas is 46%, not 100%, because we need more information and data, but it's really a first step to going to climate neutrality. The next slide is summarizing the cost and the benefits of the whole project. All in all, it will cost around 4 billion euro per year by 2040, but the benefits which were calculated in the impact assessment are above this 3.8 billion euro per year. It's around 6.6 billion euro per year. And I can tell you that in each member states, the benefits are higher than the cost. Well, having that said, I know that it's a kind of, the costs are quite concrete. I think we have a very solid information on the cost. Probably on the benefits, it's benefits for society. So it's not direct benefits, apart from the benefits coming from better energy management, where indeed, it's really profitable to invest in energy efficiency and energy and renewables. How this cost would be covered? Well, usually, as I was mentioning, it's mainly water tariff in combination with public budget. With what we propose, we simply, have three sources of financing. Water tariff will continue to be used, the public budget as well, but you can see that the proportions are relatively slow. We have calculated that the water tariff would increase on average by 2% in the European Union. And then the producer responsibility would be the last branch of coverage of the cost, where you can see that it would represent around 1.2 billion per year. And we've made different calculations on the impact on the consumer, but also industry, showing that it's really marginal compared to their margin of profits. It's really, really marginal. We have also made some assessment of affordability in each country to make sure that what we propose is not endangering the affordability in any country in the European Union. And in my last slides, it's just a summary of where we stand now. The discussion have started in the Council and the Parliament. We are really there now. We had already 5 full-day meetings with all member states, and we have different meetings with the political parties in the European Parliament. So now we are expecting in the coming weeks a position from the Council and the Parliament, and on that basis, we will try to find a compromise between the Parliament and the Council. I must say that the first reaction at member states level were relatively positive. It's clear that what we are asking is challenging for some countries, and clearly the discussion on a future compromise will be around the deadlines, so that we have deadlines acceptable for all. Some technical standards which are still problematic for some countries, and probably we will have a discussion on energy neutrality target, which is seen as very interesting by everybody, but probably some countries are hesitating on its feasibility and up to 100%. So that's part of the main reaction today that we can hear, not only from the member states, but also from the stakeholders, from the Parliament and from others. That's a summary, but I'm happy to answer to any question. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. I have a cold and I manage, but I'm losing my voice progressively, but I'm still with you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Michel. A lot of input, a lot of food for thought. I hope you can still maintain your voice for the remaining 45 minutes, because I'm sure a lot of questions will be directed towards you. But in the meantime, until your voice can relax a little bit, we're moving ahead with the agenda, and we will gain now some reactions from our benefits, starting with Sanja Barbalic. Before Sanja will provide her thoughts on your presentation also, and on the proposal for the new Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, I would just like to flag again to all the participants for today's webinar that you have the chance to post your questions in the Q&A section and also in the chat. I've seen that a number of questions already came in. We will pick them up then also, have a look at them and try to address them. So please, any questions which came up for you based on the presentation from Michelle, please go ahead posting them in the Q&A or chat section, and also any questions which may come up based on the reactions now from our further panelists. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Sanja, who, as I mentioned in the beginning, is working for Croatian Waters. She's the head of the Water Management Institute in Croatian Waters and will provide a couple of thoughts from the perspective of an EU member state in the region. So Sanja, please go ahead. One second, I think Sanja, you're still muted.
Thank you very much.
Now it works. Please go ahead.
I'm coming from the Competitive Authority for Implementation of Water Framework Directive as well. So from that point of view, I have to say that we are truly and fully support all efforts aiming to better environment, and we understand that it is a general objective of this recast of Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. And following that, I would like to raise a few questions which might be of interest to those who are in charge of planning of the implementation of that directive within the country. So my first concern is related to the shift in understanding of basic measures as they are defined in Water Framework Directive and supplementary measures. To clarify and simplify the question, the logic, how it was done. Requirements of the existing directive in River Basin Management Plan are taken as a basic measure. So they are to be implemented regardless of the water body status, regardless of whether objectives are achieved or not. Having that in mind, cost effectiveness assessment was not essential, and as a consequence, problematic affordability was discussed only and in large part compensated through EU funds transfers. If basic measures are not sufficient to achieve objectives, then supplementary measures are to be considered. And one among other supplementary measures is extension of the treatment, or was the extension of the treatment requirements for the smaller agglomerations. And it can be selected, but definitely selection of the most appropriate set of supplementary measures relied on cost effectiveness analysis and assessments and cost benefit assessments. With this recast directive, supplementary measures becomes basic measure, and collection and treatment of wastewater in smaller agglomeration is not subject to cost effectiveness analysis and should be implemented regardless of the water body status, so not only where necessary, but everywhere. Supplementary measures goes now to agglomerations less than 1,000 population equivalents. So that means that we have to rearrange the national implementation plan as well as the river basin management plans. That makes problem of achieving the objectives of Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive even more pronounced, especially for so-called small countries, countries with small population density. And that leads me to another challenge in the planning of the implementation. Is this recast tested for the clusters of member states with let's say, less than 4 to 5 million inhabitants? For example, in Croatia, we have only 3.9 million of inhabitants. With small population density, for example, we have only 68 inhabitants per square kilometer. strong depopulation trends, which we face when we are planning implementation of such directives, how to plan it when you have extremely strong depopulation trends and with a very high seasonal variations. The running and operation cost of such facilities is going to be very, very high. Do we really know how that will affect them? I'm not sure that they will equally benefit from this directive. In this case, it come up to my mind that we are now maybe should be talking about multi-speed or variable geometry Europe. That is a concept that is not my favorite, but in this case, it will be probably necessary at least to see, at least to be aware, if not to be implemented. And the third point that might be of interest is related to the national implementation plan. Most of the countries, as well as Croatia probably, they have already made their national implementation plan, and we have our second update of that plan. That plan is related to the reporting requirements just to say that what is to illustrate my concern is that in 2018 we identified 747 agglomerations, out of which 260 were larger than 2,000 population equivalent. Applying the new census from 2021, we have only 245 agglomerations, so larger than 2,000, which means we went 15 of them less. And we have 143 agglomerations that are between 1,000 and 2,000 population equivalent. 359 of them are smaller than 1,000. So we are extending our implementation plan, our basic measure, for more than a half of the previous ones. So it's not a small extension, it's a huge extension and huge load to consider. Our approach in delineation of agglomeration was quite different than proposal from the directive. So what do you think? Can we stick to the one that we have and keep the track of what was going on during this period of implementation? Or do we have to redefine all agglomeration and lose connection with the reporting history, for example? Especially because some thresholds that you put in your new directive are a little bit different than those that were before. So comparison between the old implementation plans and new implementation plans should be rather complicated, and we should think about it. There are a few more issues that should be discussed as well. Is the most of them screaming, for example, additional substances, higher level of treatments, the laboratory capacities to catch up the quality, and so on and so on. Then required standards for individual systems. Is it possible to reach the same level of reduction on individual systems as for the big facilities? Of course, overflows in combined sewage of all parts of cities where we have the biggest agglomerations is another issue. Energy neutrality costs, construction costs, but even more operation and maintenance costs, which will go much higher with a higher level of treatment. Deadlines, milestones, available technical capacities to implement such directive, especially when we talk about the transposition, then to monitor, to plan, to design, to pass all administrative procedures, to tender, to contract, to test operation, to finally put in operation and to operate such complex processes. It requires a huge setup, and especially in small country of professionals, and especially in small countries, they are not instantly available. They need some time to adjust. My very concern is related as well to reaching required removal rates due to seasonal variety in smaller facilities, as well as safety during operation, because those are all issues that should be dealt within authorizations that water authorities should issue for operators. So all the authorization forms should be made completely different, which means that all sub-regulations should be adjusted in order to implement this directive. But all those issues can wait for another opportunities as well, for I'm really sure that disregards of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive is and will be a hot topic for a bit of a time. It's not very close, but we cannot discuss about all of this, but those are the concerns from the national level, policy level, which has to make the environment for the implementation of that directive. Not only the money, not only the implementation, but the whole environment should be somehow leveled and balanced in order to implement it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanja. Quite extensive list of issues which you raised. I see already we should have extended the webinar to 3 hours and not only 1 hour, 15 minutes. Michelle, I think it's, there were many issues raised. Maybe you can then pick out afterwards, because I would like to first do the 3 reactions, pick out some of them. So Sanja raised a couple of points, for instance, the link with the Water Framework Directive and the river basin management plans. Then also the issue of small countries and areas which are not densely populated, or even where depopulation is taking place. We know that's an issue in many countries, not only in Croatia, in particular in the Danube region, in a number of countries. That's a relevant point. And also related, of course, to the question of the definition of agglomerations and what is sufficiently concentrated. Maybe you can afterwards also address briefly this point. And of course, the national implementation plan and the needs also for countries in order to implement the directives, existing capacities, etc. Maybe you can touch upon a couple of these points then afterwards. I pre-warned already our 3 panelists. I'm sure a lot of challenges are raised, but I would like to have a final round and where you also outline basically the opportunities stemming from the proposal of the new directive, so that we also discuss a little bit the positive side and the opportunities you see with the proposal from the Commission. So thanks a lot, Sanja, again. I would like now to move on to Anke Leder, who is working at the Polytechnic University of Tirana and will provide a reaction from her perspective, also a little bit keeping in mind the situation of the non-EU countries, where we have a number of them in the Danube region, and in particular candidate countries, which of course also follow the developments at the EU level and probably have in mind how can we implement this directive and the revised directive in the future, where the existing directive is already quite challenging. So maybe there's some concerns also coming up from this side. So, but without further ado, handing over to you, Anke Leder, with your reaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Raimund. Last year, the European Union officially launched the membership negotiations with Albania, and consequently, we are now under the preparatory process for EU negotiation that includes the water directives forming part of the Chapter 27 on environment. In that frame, Albania is finalizing the first 2 directive-specific implementation plans for DCIP on Drinking Water Directive and Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, respectively. The DCIP for Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive is prepared based on the current Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive criteria. And as Michel underlined in his presentation today, this directive is easy to follow the steps of transposition and implementation process, but is hard on investment costs. So in that frame, let me reveal some news from Albania, Republic of Albania. They are not yet official, but this is a chance to really say it out loud. 18 sensitive areas has been delineated within the 7 river basins in Albania. 165 agglomeration has been identified, in which about 2/3 of the population in Albania are currently living. 81 of the total wastewater loads from those 165 agglomeration is collected, and 114 wastewater treatment plants are planned to be constructed up to 2050. The sludge production will increase from 8 tons dry solids this year to 40,000 tons dry solids per year in 2050. Therefore, a national plan to manage sewage sludge 2020-2050 is under the final stage of preparation. So, colleagues, 2.3 billion euros are needed to fully implement the old wastewater treatment directive for Albania. So in line with Michelle's presentation on challenges with the new urban wastewater treatment plant implementation, let me really pick out few topics that they are in favor, and few of them that they will impact the increase of the cost for implementation of urban wastewater treatment plant directive in Albania. Let me start from rainfall. This proposed intervention really helps a lot. You know why? Because based on last research studies, I was involved, almost 150 feasibility studies, they reported that although some of sewer network were initially designed as separate systems, nowadays, because of unplanned and uncontrolled development in Albania, they all receive a significant quantity of stormwater. This results in widely reported hydraulic undersize of existing pipes, sewage blockages, and a frequent flooding. About small cities, as Sanja mentioned, in the category of less than 2,000 population equivalent, 37 agglomerations are identified. Although the size of those agglomerations is below 2,000 population equivalent, they were included in the list of agglomeration due to their proximity with the larger agglomeration, and they have an existing sewage system. Related to the nutrients, these 165 agglomerations identified will need a total treatment capacity of about 3.8 million population equivalent, of which almost 60% will require the removal of nutrients. Beyond this level, as the new directive of urban wastewater treatment requires, will increase the investment cost foreseen up to now. Related to micropolluants, the current DCIP of urban wastewater treatment directive does not directly address micropolluants. So fight with micropolluants will increase the investment cost for the implementation of the new urban wastewater treatment plant directive in Albania. Related to individual and other appropriate systems, we all know that these are mini wastewater treatment systems for one or few houses. They should absolutely provide the same level of environmental protection as decentralized, centralized treatment infrastructure. They are not regulated in Albania, unfortunately. They are even partially considered in this DCIP Albania has drafted. Related to the good governance, I like this topic. While the sewage network and wastewater treatment plants in Albania are under the responsibility of water utilities, the evacuation of stormwater is under the responsibility of municipality. But we have combined sewer with two different institutions. They should really work together so hard in order to do a good job, and they are not doing it. The last is about the Green Deal or circular economy, one of the elements. So Water Supply and Sewage Association in Albania and I have been organized a few events to support circular economy on wastewater and treatment. And leading by examples, let me share with you that Durrës wastewater treatment plants, one of the largest scale implemented in the Balkan area, produces energy covering 30% of their electricity bill for the treatment plant. And Kocha and Velipoja, 2 more wastewater treatment plants, around 100,000 population equivalent, have installed photovoltaics to cover the energy cost. So in summary, colleagues, all new proposed challenges of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive are homework for Albania, which may not be obligatory for the time being, but still an excellent fundamental for leading towards the good status of national water resources. And from you, colleagues, will benefit a lot from the transfer of knowledge as from the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lenke. So a lot of points raised again, in particular also the challenge for the directive-specific implementation plans, so the DSIPs. So is there need to revise them now? We have to keep in mind it's a proposal for the new directive. It's not adopted yet, so there will be a negotiation process involving the Council, the European Parliament. And of course, that's also related to quite some extent to the deadlines for the implementation, in particular for the non-EU countries, which are in the negotiation process for Chapter 27. I think these are important points which were raised and which, Michelle, you may want to pick up then also after we have feedback from our third panelist, who is Csaba Bauer, who I introduced in the beginning already. Csaba is from Romania, a water treatment manager from the company Aquaserve. And we will be very interested, Csaba, to hear your perspective, your point of view from a utility in an EU member state where you're running several actually utilities as a regional company. And we're looking forward to your reaction. So Csaba, handing over to you.
Thank you very much, Raymond. Hello, everybody. I would like to thank you to Michel for that very nice summary he made for regarding the new wastewater directive. And in order to understand my point of view, I have to tell you 2 words about what regional operation means in Romania. In our country, there is an institutional framework which coagulate 44 regional operators. Mainly, every county in Romania has a regional operator. These operators are responsible for 2 things. They are the main engine or locomotive of the infrastructure development, which means that we are assessing the situation, we are preparing documents for financing, of course, with certain assistance. We are preparing the works, we are following them. And after that, our main task is to operate properly these systems. Regarding the new directive, and I don't want to go in all of small details because we do not have time. Maybe you will organize another webinar for 2 hours, maybe, or 3, and to discuss every detail. I see 2 very interesting and very important issues. One of them is the deadlines. I have to tell you that comparing with Sanja and Enkelate, Romania starts from another point than Croatia or Albania. We are member state of EU since 2007, so we are busy taking also the pre-accession period for almost 15 years. We are dealing with wastewater treatment plant rehabilitations and, of course, sewage system extensions. But we see 2 main issues, deadlines. We think that they are very tight. And I will point it out some details further on. And the costs. Here we're discussing about 2 costs. Investment costs, and hopefully we will benefit from Brussels. The main part of the investment costs through EU funds, and as it happens also before. But there are also the operational costs, which has to take into the consideration. Reinforced limits. In our operations, I mean in Mureș County, all the wastewater treatment plants, I discuss about just the plants because there are required also some sewer extensions, but the wastewater treatment plants were already prepared for nutrient removal, of course, taking the limits of the old directive. In this moment, now we are trying to assess the situation, but even if we will have some a part of the wastewater treatment facilities with enough capacity, taking in consideration the volumes, we are expecting to a need for external carbon sources for this very high rate of denitrification, which will lead to extra operational costs. Micropollutants. We don't know what the situation is because our wastewater treatment plants were not tested, but we have to assess the situation, and we will have to find out those technical solutions which will solve the quaternary treatment if it will be necessary. My favorite topic is energy neutrality. According to the document, I cannot see in this moment if energy neutrality has to be fulfilled by every wastewater treatment facility, or you can take into the consideration, for example, for Aquaserve situation in Mureș County, Romania, 10 wastewater treatment plants, and they all together has to solve the neutrality, because I am not really familiar with all those possibilities which can solve the energy neutrality of a wastewater treatment plant. But what we saw till now is that we need some external organic material, and we need anaerobic digesters in order to produce electricity and heat. Of course, solar energy is also can be taken in account, but I cannot see the necessary land or terrain to extend the wastewater treatment plant with all those facilities, which can give us a high amount of power necessary to cover the electrical energy needs. Sanya already touched the issue regarding the integrated urban wastewater management plans. There is a figure. This is a very nice figure. 1% of the collected wastewater can be discharged through combined sewer overflows. There are two solutions, of course. It's just a question of money. To rebuild a 100-year-old combined sewer system in the central part of the cities, because that's the situation in our operations, or to have the necessary land to construct compensation tanks or reservoirs to catch the water when there is a rain, and to treat it after that in a wastewater treatment plant. So, but I don't want to cry on this new directive, because and I let it at the end. There are also opportunities, and we see those opportunities. We will have a cleaner environment, and as Michel said, also implementing the old wastewater directive reverse, and also in our county became more clear. So there are some very positive effects, and also we see some opportunities to refurbish, to rebuild some small wastewater, especially some small wastewater operations which are not performing according to the new regulation. And of course, maybe you can imagine Târgu Mureș wastewater treatment plant, our biggest operation with a capacity of 150,000 population equivalent, roughly, was refurbished for tertiary treatment 15 years ago. There are some parts, there are some weird equipments which hopefully could be included in those works. Yes, roughly that would be. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, I would be pleased to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Csaba, much appreciated. Again, a couple of really interesting points raised. The concern is again shared with regards to tight deadlines, then the cost not only in terms of investments into the infrastructure, but also operation and maintenance, obviously. Then also how to deal with wastewater treatment plants which were already constructed and the needs to potentially upgrade them. And also maybe some point for clarification, specification, energy neutrality, whether this is meant at utility level or for the sector as a whole in the country. And Csaba also mentioned a number of positive points then in the end. So a lot of food for thought again. For the participants, again, please use the Q&A. I've seen some questions came in. Michelle, I would like now to come back to you. It would be great if you could react on these interventions from Sanja and Keleda and Csaba, just pick out a couple of them. And then afterwards, we could also look into the Q&A section, pick out a couple of questions from the Q&A and have them for discussion. So with this, Michelle, I would like to give the word back to you for some reactions from your side.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for this reaction. I must say, I'm conscious that probably, you are representing 3 countries having already difficulties to reach the existing directive. I'm conscious of that. I understand that it's already a big challenge. To be honest, I think that you are in a phase which was met by other countries before, there is a kind of slow increase of the infrastructure and then a rapid increase. And then probably when you will receive the first infringement procedure, it will be another acceleration, I'm sorry, but it's often the past experience having shown that I think that we need in some member states, and I am conscious again of that, it was the case in my country when I was working in my country on the same field, So indeed, without the kind of electroshock at a certain time, the means are not put and the competence are not enough, in the sector. So it's clear that, what we are asking is demanding. I'm conscious of that. I'm conscious that it will absolutely, require a revision of the existing plans of investment. That's absolutely clear. There is no way of the, it is the reality. It will be the reality. It will require additional investment. That's again, it is identified country per country in our impact assessment. We have really calculated for each country what would be the additional cost, and not only the investment cost, but also the operational cost. So all that is absolutely clear for us and for everybody. But I realize that, the level of challenge might be different according to the countries. I know that, and that's why I think in the discussion now in the Council and the Parliament, we will have a serious discussion about the deadline, what is achievable and what is not achievable. And probably, for some countries where the starting position is more complex, more time would be required. And that's it. We don't want, that the last, countries are driving the whole process, because for some countries, the deadline that we are proposing are not problematic at all. So we would like to move, with these countries already, and then with the others, find what is reasonable for everybody. I think what is important with this new directive and in the negotiation now is that we manage to have a compromise which is acceptable for everybody. because otherwise, you know, if we are forcing the path, you know, it would mean that the implementation will be at risk. So we need to continue this discussion. And thanks again for your reaction. I took note of everything, you know, and I think that now, in fact, our role as Commission, we have made our proposal. We took our responsibility. We are defending this proposal now, but in a few weeks' time, we will have the position of the Parliament and the Council. And at the end, it is the Parliament and the Council deciding, not us. We will just help them to find a compromise. Huh? So the roles are a little bit different now, but we will help to try to find a compromise which is acceptable for the large majority of the member states. Having that said, we have included in the directive different tools for the member states. On top of the regional funds, you will have this system of producer responsibility. So in principle, the additional infrastructure for micropollutant should not be paid by the public authorities, neither by the citizen directly, you know. So this is something that is to be taken in charge by industry. Obviously, industry can repercute part of this cost on the cost of their product, but they can take that also their margin of profit. So this is the classical way of making producer responsibility. I must say that, the alternative is simple. We just do nothing, and it means that it will be, again, water tariff of public budget. But we have taken our responsibility, and we think it makes sense to have this system of producer responsibility. Rapidly on the stormwater overflow, we are very reasonable in this proposal. Precisely, we try to push the member states to go through optimized solution at their local level so that they will avoid additional infrastructure where it's not needed. So we have seen a lot of good examples in the countries, you know, where by simple, clever management of the existing infrastructure could drive to really good results without to invest, into additional reservoir. It's just a management, an IT management, if you like, modelization, and also, a management of the infrastructure in an optimal way. That's why we would like to go in that direction to avoid use this additional big concrete infrastructure, because we think that it's not the path to follow. On the EAS, you mentioned that it will be difficult to reach the same level of treatment. Yes, indeed, but the directive today imposes already that. And I'm conscious that this directive is not well implemented for EAS, you know. So it's not a big problem in the large majority of countries where EAS individual systems represent less than 2%. Huh? It's around, there are only 9 countries reporting more than 2%. But in some countries, and I think it's the case in Croatia, the level of EAS is so big that we need to do something there, because it's impossible to keep this situation where you have on one side big obligation on agglomeration and then vast amount of EAS everywhere, not reaching the minimum standard. This is a situation that we have to manage, once for all, and probably it will be dolorous for Croatia, but I think that there is no other way around. It's a question of fairness and also a question of good treatment of the pollution. That's absolutely clear. The links with the Water Framework Directive are already in this directive, but we can reinforce them, notably on the deadline. There are deadlines for the River Basin Management Program, and there was already a suggestion from stakeholders in some countries to better align the deadline of this directive with the River Basin Program, and that's a good idea, and I think that's something that we can certainly follow. On the cost, what I was explaining, that I think the cost in relation to energy neutrality, you have really to understand that there will be investment costs for energy neutrality, but the revenues from that are really profitable. I mean, this type of investment is super profitable, and I think it's very sad that the wastewater treatment sector is disconnected from the energy ministry, because in the energy ministry, there are a lot of possibilities of energy funds in the European Union, notably under the Repower EU, but simply it's 2 different silos, it's 2 different ministries discussing that, So that's why we have managed to include wastewater treatment sector in the Renew Repower European strategy, meaning it opened the paths for additional funds for renewable energy, particularly in this sector. So the target is fixed at a national level, so it's not for each wastewater treatment plant. It's simply that all wastewater treatment plants, about 10,000 inhabitants, should, participate to this mutualization of the energy neutrality target. Meaning, in other terms, that one big wastewater treatment plant can be net producer of energy and can compensate for the energy used in other treatment plants. That's absolutely clear. Also, in the discussion now, we are, checking to what extent we could accept that solar energy or wind energy produced outside the strict limitation of the site might be taken on board on the attainment of this target, but probably we'll have to introduce some flexibility in the system, knowing that our objective is really to do as much as we can in the sector. I think the production of biogas today, for instance, which is a substitute to natural gas, well, it makes a lot of sense to do that now at the European Union. For us, it's a kind of mine which is there and not properly used, and we should use it to the most we can so that we are less dependent of imports of gas. I don't have to tell you that in the current geopolitical context, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that this sector should take its own responsibility from that point of view. At the end, if we manage to have this energy neutrality target, and that's my firm hope, it would mean that the sector would be protected from any future energy price and market fluctuation, which I think we have seen in the last months, that it's really fundamental to ensure this neutrality, simply to make sure that sanitation will continue, even if the price of energy is high. So that's the most, maybe there was a question of nitrogen. We have calculated the additional cost to reach this nitrogen target. It's around, on average, 10% of additional cost. It is included in our cost calculation. And again, there we will discuss how best to reach this target without imposing a refurbishment of some facilities. That's the balance that we have to find now in the discussion in the Council and the Parliament. I'm honest. I think that this nitrogen objective is quite high, and that it needs an additional discussion at technical level to make sure that we find this optimum, between additional investment, operational cost, and also reduction of nitrogen where it makes sense. I think with that, I have covered most of them. In the chat, there is some question on access to sanitation. It's clear that we have included something. It's also the implementation of the SDG 6.2, the Sustainable Development Goal. And we have, in fact, in access to sanitation, is really mirror requirement than in the Drinking Water Directive, when indeed there is an obligation for the member states to first identify vulnerable and marginalized people, and then to ensure a minimum service of water supply and sanitation. And then there are also some requirements, but which are voluntary in a sense, to push member states to invest in enough sanitation infrastructure in the cities, and particularly for women, because this is something which was identified not only by the United Nations in the SDG, but also by the World Health Organization, for instance. So we are insisting on that as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Michel. You addressed a number of questions, and not only from our panelists, but also in the chat. If I may just pick out, there were some additional points which were raised. There's one question, and maybe we can have a quick reaction, and maybe we can go 2 to 3 minutes over time. There's one question whether the directive says methods how to measure microplastics and limiting values. Maybe you can address this one briefly. And also there was one question from Adam Covert from ICPDR. How should the risk assessment be carried out? Member states will probably need to use additional adequate monitoring or modeling tools, and whether the EC will provide guidance on this. And then a third question, also interesting for us, of course, generally on the transition period. If there are negotiations ongoing for candidate countries based on the existing directive, how will the discussions on the new directive be taken into account, in particular in terms of the deadlines? Maybe you can briefly address these 3 points in addition.
Okay, so the method to measure microplastics, we are working on it in the Drinking Water Directive context. So we'll have a first methodology, standardized and harmonized methodology for drinking water. On that basis, our Joint Research Center will work on surface water and wastewater, so that we will have an harmonized methodology for measurement of microplastics. I understand that depending on the method, you can have very different results, so it's important to have this harmonization. For the risk-based approach, in the directive, we are explaining what we mean by the risk-based approach. For instance, for micropollutant, we have some criteria. For instance, where there is a risk for public health because there is drinking water which is taken, after the wastewater treatment plants, or whether there is a batting area, or whether the dilution rate is low. You know, if the river is the release from the wastewater treatment plant, clearly, you know, the risk is increasing, you know. So we have criteria which are defined already in the directive. If need be, we could provide additional guidance, but we have tried to have very simple criteria in the directive so that it can trigger a direct implementation without having to think too much, you know. So with very simple criteria, and so that we have all the same basis for the application of this directive. You know, obviously we can, you know, modeling tools, for instance, that's more relevant for the rainwater, where indeed there are very performant modeling tools already used in some cities in the European Union, but also, you know, developed by the national authority and then given to the local authority. I think that in the future we could organize an exchange of best practice on that, and probably also help and support some member states if they want to develop their own modeling, which is available for their cities. Huh? So, and then for nitrogen, yeah, I think there is a question on nitrogen and phosphorus. Indeed, for phosphorus, it's a little bit less challenging, but we have heard recently there are some temporary difficulties to have access to some chemicals to treat phosphorus. But all in all, most of the member states and most of the stakeholders are more worried for nitrogen and not so much for phosphorus. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Michelle. Two quick questions from my side in addition, and then afterwards a quick round, 2 sentences where you see opportunities. So coming then back to Sanya and Kaleda and Java. So Michelle, just briefly, one question. Sewage sludge directive. Are you also working with the revised directive of the wastewater treatment directive also on issues related to sewage sludge? We see that in many countries this is really raised as an issue in the discussions, because with all investments in urban wastewater treatment, the question comes up what to do with the sewage sludge. So that's really an issue in many countries. And second question, opportunities to participate. Obviously, we cannot touch upon all these points in the frame of this webinar. There will be the discussions in the council and the parliament. Are there opportunities more broadly for stakeholders to engage in the discussions on the new directive? So this would be 2 questions, and then I would like to come back to the panelists. Thank you.
Okay, on the sewage sludge directive, there is an evaluation which will be published in the coming weeks, so it's nearly done. On the basis of the evaluation, there will be a decision whether we will review or not this directive, but it will be for the next mandate. It will not happen in the short term. I think one of the questions is precisely to wait the result of the negotiation on the urban wastewater treatment directive, so that if there is a revision of the sewage sludge directive, it is fully coherent with what we are going to review. So that's a little bit the standoff point. In this directive, we have included a chapter on non-domestic release, which are you know, not targeted by the wastewater treatment plants. And in fact, we are strongly reinforcing the control on the inlets of the water coming into wastewater treatment plants, so that you know, those pollution which are not treated, you know, could be tracked at source and reduced at source. The objective is to improve the quality of the water at the end, you know, so that water reuse might become more easy, but also to avoid the contamination of the sludge, and so that this sludge can be used notably in agriculture. So that's a little bit the philosophy of this directive. We try to make the link with the sewage sludge in the sense that we will try to reduce pollution at source to avoid a pollution of the sludge. But I know that it's not always possible, particularly in complex cities. So probably part of the sludge will still need to be eliminated. It depends on the quality of the sludge. That's relatively clear. We have also the possibility to develop a further implementing act to fix nitrogen and phosphorus minimum recovery rates. But it's not yet for now, and it is a little bit contested by the stakeholder and the member states. So we'll see whether all that will stay in the final text. But I think it's a good idea to have that and to push the recovery nitrogen, because it requires a lot of energy to produce nitrogen, you know, as a fertilizer, and phosphorus simply because as a natural gas, I mean, we are depending from external source for our phosphorus in the European Union. So I think that everything should be done to recover phosphorus. You know, it's a critical raw material in the European Union. So we need to, it's a mine again, you know, of phosphorus sludge and residues, you know. opportunity to participate, but there is now public consultation, a last one, on the final text. So if you go on our website, there is a possibility to participate, but I think it is closing in the coming days, so it's relatively short. Now we are in a democratic debate. I mean, it's not completely in our hands, as I was mentioning. It's really the Council and the Parliament which are in first line, and probably and they will have to take the decision on this file. So now it's really the European democracy working, and okay, I can only recommend you to pass through your national authorities or through your Euro deputies. I mean, that's the best I can say. But also, we are always at our level open to any suggestion and good remark, and also bad remark, on this text. I think it's important for us to understand. And I just received position paper from different institutions, so it's always good for us. We are listening to everybody, including today to you. I can tell you that it's really important for us to have these feedbacks, whether it's positive or negative. I think it's important for us to understand, and to listen. It's just a proposal of the Commission, and now I think it's really, everybody who has to react to that, and we have to adapt the text so that it is acceptable for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Michel. I think we exhausted you a lot. So quick round, 1 to 2 sentences on the opportunities which you see, starting maybe with Sanja.
First, well, Croatia is a touristic country, so having a perfect environment is something which we cannot develop, and we have really to rely on this open opportunity to improve the communication with the population, with the people, with the inhabitants, in order to involve them much more and to get from them better willingness to pay and to maintain. So improvement of energy efficiency will be very important to secure regular operation, definitely during the season, where we cannot have any kind of failure of working of the treatment facilities. And in average, we have to invest and we have to develop a better approach to management of wastewater, including the management of the sludge, and of course, very welcome involvement of the producers and their contribution to entire story. We did not have that up till now, and I think it would be of tremendous opportunity to reinforce this wastewater sector.
Thanks a lot, Sanja. Thanks a lot. Enkeleda, 1 to 2 sentences, very quickly.
Yeah, new urban wastewater treatment directive is kind of light for Albania. How to better do our job, how to save the environment, and how to gain from all experiences, broad experiences you have really collected in 30 years implementing this directive.
Thanks a lot. Csaba, quick reaction from your side.
Yes, of course, we are waiting for the final version of the directive. And I wish to all of us the necessary power and health to implement it and to be happy with it. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Csaba. I think we can wish all of us this. So we will also stand ready to support countries and stakeholders on this challenge as an implementation of the existing directive, but also the new directive, which is under negotiation. And with this, I think, we are already 9 minutes over time. We would like to close today's webinar. There's some information also in the chat where you can sign up and register to get information on upcoming webinars. As mentioned in the beginning, we will share the presentation, which was kindly provided by Michel via the website. We will also share the recording for this webinar and also prepare a short summary, which will also be available on the website. So with this, I would what remains is to say really big thank you for your investment. So Michelle, thanks a lot really for your availability. It's really much appreciated. And we really hope it's a vehicle also for you to extend your knowledge and your positions and your views a little beyond the EU countries, because with the Danube program, we are covering the region with non-EU countries, EU countries. So I hope that's also useful for you. Sanya and Keleda, Csaba, thanks a lot for your reactions, much appreciated. I think you touched upon really a couple of interesting points, and it was a super interesting discussion. Maybe we should indeed consider for such important topics spending some more time in the future. And finally, big thanks for the team behind the Danube Water Program for all the support in setting up this KnowNow webinar series. Please look out. We have upcoming webinars also in the future, and look forward to stay in touch and work together with you on the water secure Danube region, on the clean Danube region, and yeah, to be in touch and work together. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.